The following video is provided to demonstrate proper installation techniques for installing the Rifle Basix SA-V2 trigger on Savage centerfire 110 type actions equipped with the standard factory trigger or the Accutrigger. The trigger is 100% drop-in and no special tools are required. By following the steps which are presented in the proper sequence, a successful installation may be achieved by anyone with average mechanical skills. The tools required are the 5/64 Allen wrench, comes packed in the kit, a small screwdriver, Loctite and/or red fingernail polish, a small tube of light grease, spring gauges if you have them. This is a Chatillon 0 to 12 ounce and 1/4 ounce increments. This is a standard OHAS 0 to 4.5 pounds. Not necessary, but convenient if you have them. A small clean cloth and 320 wet or dry sandpaper. Here we have the rear section of a Savage 110 type action with an Accutrigger and safety assembly installed. Remove the trigger pivot pin E-clip. Remove the trigger pivot pin. Remove the Accutrigger assembly. Notice how deep the Accutrigger safety is recessed in the receiver. Here she protects the sear pivot pin E-clip with her finger, removes the E-clip, protects the sear reset spring with her thumb, and pushes out the sear pivot pin. She has retained the sear reset spring without losing it. You're going to remove the sear pivot pin. And remove the sear. He's going to lift out and remove the trigger bracket. Pushes the safety to the fire position and holds it there while she inserts a paper clip in the small hole behind the safety to keep the safety in the fire position. Bends the paper clip over to hold it there. Now she's formed a little piece of wire here. This is soft mechanics wire, but you could make this out of a coat hanger or paper clip with a little curve on the end of it to help you handle the detent spring. Here Amber spreads the trigger bracket. Uses her little wire tool to handle that safety detent spring. Removes it from the factory bracket. Savage factory Accutrigger parts to be reused. Sear pivot pin, 90-degree sear reset spring, Accutrigger safety detent spring, Accutrigger sear, Parts contained in an SAV2 kit: housing or the trigger bracket, trigger or the finger lever, intermediate lever assembly, the new pivot pins with their E-clips, red color-coded weighted pull spring, white color-coded weighted pull spring, silver preload spring, the short 832 by 3/8 safety and over travel screws for the standard trigger, 832 by 3/8 preload adjustment screw, the long 832 by 1/2 inch safety and over travel screws for the Accutrigger, 5/64 Allen wrench, 150-degree sear spring to replace the old spring with bushing, 832 by 3/16 weighted pull adjustment screw. The Rifle Basics bracket has two holes. The front one is for the standard trigger. The rear one that she's pointing to now is for the Accutrigger detent spring that she's just removed from the factory bracket. She's going to insert her little homemade tool in that rear upper hole, the large hole. Pushes the factory detent spring on the end of that curve on the wire. Presses it with her finger down onto that curved end of that wire and holds it very firmly while she guides it into one side of the bracket. One hole. Now Amber will show you the inside of the bracket. She's going to push that spring forward and allow it to pop in the other hole on the other side. There, the detent spring has been installed in the Rifle Basics bracket. Measure between the ears. The distance between the ears on the bracket should be 0.575 to 0.585. You can open or close that housing, open it with a screwdriver or close it with pliers a little bit to maintain that dimension, 0.575. It's nice if they fit tightly over the receiver. Here Amber is going to remove our paper clip while she's holding that safety in the fire position, the forward position. This is going to install the bracket on the receiver, and again those ears should fit tightly over the receiver. This is a trial fit to make sure that pin will slide through with your fingers. Some minor fitting may be required. This is going to install the sear over the top of the bracket, over the top of the receiver, and again she pushes in the sear pivot pin without the sear spring. You must confirm this sear will rotate freely, no binding. And Amber indicates that that sear is perfectly free there. And she's going to pull back the sear pivot pin just enough to install the sear reset spring. She points out where the sear spring goes in that opening with the screwdriver. You're going to drop the sear spring in place and release it for final assembly. That's an excellent shot of the proper position of that sear reset spring. The leg sticking out, one leg behind the sear, one leg in that machine groove in the receiver. Positioned perfectly for final installation. No tools required if you do it right. She's putting her finger on the end of the pivot pin. She's going to compress both legs of that spring simultaneously. When it's in final position, she's pushing the sear pivot pin through it. Now she's going to check the sear to make sure the spring is resetting it like it's designed to do. Now here she checks the detent, the safety detent positions. If your sear pivot pin has a groove in it for an E-clip, you may install the E-clip now, allow it to pop in place. He's holding it with her thumb. Snaps in the groove. Notice that the trigger housing and sear are now installed on a complete action. Installation of remaining parts is identical in all applications. She's going to put a little grease on her finger and put it on that sear surface of the intermediate lever. These parts are hard, and a little grease on that intermediate lever will allow pieces to get to know each other during the first few cycles of operation. Once the grease wears off, you don't need to reapply it. She's going to insert that intermediate lever in the front of the bracket over the top of the sear. Take one of the pivot pins, push it through the bracket, through the intermediate lever, and install an E-clip on the other side. She's holding it in place with her finger while she installs the E-clip. Protect an E-clip with her thumb. Allows the E-clip to snap in place with the screwdriver. Now you must confirm that intermediate lever can rotate freely. No binding. She shows that the lever can rotate freely. By rotating the barreled action on its axis, you can see that gravity will actually allow it to drop away from the sear. For light weights of pull up to 16 ounces, install red color-coded weight of pull spring in bottom of housing underneath intermediate lever. Install 832 by 3/16 adjustment screw. Turn clockwise to compress spring halfway. Notice spring is now pushing intermediate lever against sear. Heavier weights of pull require white color-coded spring. Karen's pointing out the longer screws to be used in the Accutrigger installation. These are 832 by 1/2 inch. For demonstration purposes only, she's going to install the shorter 832 by 3/8 using just a little Loctite in the threads. This screw is used in the safety position. It's the rear screw. Again, when you put these screws in, you want to be sure you use the long ones for your Accutrigger installation. She's just simply installing the screws with a rough adjustment. This is the over travel screw, which goes just in front of the safety screw in the rear of the trigger. Here she's going to install the finger lever or the trigger. She's putting a little light grease on her fingertip. She's going to put a little of it on the nose of the trigger. Going to insert this trigger or finger lever in the back of the housing. You'll be able to see the 3 optional holes here. She's going to take one of the pivot pins, the last remaining pivot pin, and put it in the center hole. And hold it in place with her finger. Hasn't put the E-clip on yet. Here she's going to install the preload spring in the back of the trigger. And another 832 by 3/8 screw to compress that preload spring slightly. This preloads the trigger and maintains contact between the trigger and the intermediate lever inside the housing. You can see there that the preload spring has control of that finger lever. Safety adjustment screw, over travel adjustment screw, weight of pull adjustment screw, sear adjustment screw with its jam nut. Since you got the bolt out, let's give it a little care and feeding before we put it back in the receiver. Here she rotates the gas protection lugs at 90 degrees away from the locking lugs. Puts a little grease on the tip of her finger. She's going to grease the back surface of those locking lugs. Rotate the gas protection lugs back in place. That right lug has got a rail on the bottom of it, which she's going to point out right here. There's the rail. The rail must go on the right side of the bolt to allow the bolt to go back in the receiver. Again, this is a left-handed bolt in the striker, so the rail would be opposite the bolt handle. You're going to put a little more grease on the cocking piece ramp on the bolt body. Reinstall the bolt and receiver. You're ready to test the trigger. She's got the pivot pin in the center hole. And I close the bolt slowly and carefully. Test the trigger with the spring gauge. She's moved that trigger pivot pin to the forward position to get a little more mechanical advantage. Again, she's going to close the bolt slowly and carefully. Test the trigger pull again. This is a Chatillon 0 to 12 ounce trigger pull gauge with 1/4 ounce calibrated in 1/4 ounce increments. This is a sear adjustment screw. Turning the screw clockwise reduces sear engagement. Counterclockwise increases sear engagement. This is the weight of pull adjustment screw. Turning it clockwise increases weight of pull. Turning it counterclockwise decreases weight of pull. Trigger is now mounted on an action with an Accutrigger safety. Note the long screws in the rear of the trigger so they can reach the recessed Accutrigger safety. Karen cocks the bolt handle and moves the safety to the safe position. Now she turns that rear safety screw clockwise until it just touches the recessed Accutrigger safety. Now she'll test the trigger to make sure that it's safe. It is. Now she'll move the safety to the fire position to confirm the action will fire. Now it's in the fired condition, and now is the time to adjust the over travel adjustment. She turns the over travel screw clockwise to remove some or all of the over travel. When that screw touches the safety, all the over travel will be removed. Now she's going to recock the action. Test the trigger for normal function. Here she's going to mark the adjustment screws with red nail polish to show that the adjustments are final. And when you put the barrel action back in the stock, you want to make certain that no part of the trigger assembly touches the stock or the trigger guard. Design of Rifle Basix SAV2 will provide light pull trigger operation and will require firearm to be handled with care. Always close bolt slowly and carefully. Keep firearm pointed in a safe direction while loading and unloading, and when operating bolt and safety. To see additional coverage on the Rifle Basics line, go to our website at www.riflebasics.com. See applications on Remington, Savage, Marlin, Weatherby, Mossberg, CZ, Ruger, and Winchester.